Learning checkpoint 5.2. Here's number 1. It says, what are the two x-intercepts of this graph? And then to write your answers as ordered pairs with no spaces in between. We need to remember what an x-intercept means. That's going to be the place where the graph crosses the x-axis. So if I'm looking at this graph right here, I see that I'm crossing the x-axis at this location, so you'll need to name that point. And I'm also crossing right here at this location. You will need to name that point. So I'll go ahead and dot the points on the screen for you. You need to remember how we label the points. We always do the x coordinate first, then the y coordinate. And on this question, it doesn't matter which point you place in which blank. The OHS will take them in either order. It doesn't matter which point goes in blank 1 or which one goes in blank number 2. Question 2 says select all three. I'm going to underline that. All three correct statements about this graph. And your question might have the answers in a different order than what you see on my screen, but that's okay. Let's go through and pick out some of the obvious options. The graph opens downward versus the graph opens upward. Only one of those can be correct. So the graph either opens up to the sky or it might look like it is upside down. That'll help you choose between those two. This one also looks pretty easy, deciding between the vertex. The vertex is going to be the high point or the low point of the graph. It's the turning point where the graph kind of starts to flip and go in a different direction. And if I'm looking at this picture, I notice at this point right here where I'm putting this pink dot, that's the vertex or the turning point of my graph. You need to just label that point with the correct x and y coordinates, and that'll give you one of these two checkboxes. And then I saved the last two choices. The top one says, as x increases or decreases, the graph only decreases. And then we also have this option, as x increases or decreases, the graph only increases. So what these two options are saying is no matter what x is doing, the graph is doing what? And so if the graph opens up to the sky, both ends of the graph are going to be going up. They're pointing up or increasing. If the graph is opening down, then both ends of the graph are going to point down or be decreasing. Number 3 says, which graphs have a positive average rate of change? And if you remember, average rate of change is kind of like the slope of the graph, but we don't call it slope for these exponential functions. A positive average rate of change would mean that the graph is going up from left to right. So you need to look at your options, start on the left-hand side of the graphs. So for example, choice A, I'm going to start here on the left side of this graph and follow it to the right. If my cursor goes up, that is a positive average rate of change. And you will just test out all 5 of these choices by starting on the left side of the graph, moving to the right, see if you're going up or down. Up is a positive average rate of change. Down is a negative average rate of change. Question 4 says, what is the slope of this graph? So in order to find the slope, we're going to use our handy-dandy slope formula where we find our y values and subtract them, and then we divide by the difference of the x values. So you have 2 pretty convenient points labeled for you already, and so we're going to use this formula, y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1 to calculate out our slope. We can use the points 7, 0, and 0, 3.5 to get our answer. So you will find the 2 y values and subtract them, then take the 2 x values and subtract them. I do want to point out that while you're checking your final answer, take a look at the way that this blue line is headed. It has a negative slope because it's going down from left to right. So please make sure that your final answer is negative because that would match the slope of this graph. The last question, number 5, says choose the 2 correct statements about this graph. So I know that only 2 of the choices are going to be correct, And let's go through and narrow them down. These first two options both say as x increases, so I can go ahead and take care of those right away. If my x values are increasing, that means I start on the left and I move to the right. I start with small values of x, and I want my x values to get larger. And you're just seeing what happens to the graph as you follow that movement. So again, I'm going to start on the left, move to the right, and I see that my graph tends to go upward. So you will select whichever choice matches that description best. And then your bottom two choices say as x decreases. So we can't have both of them correct. It can only do one thing as it decreases. So let's just test it out, see what's going on. For x decreasing, I start with the big values of x, like over here, and I'm going to move to the left. So I start on the right, and I read the graph backwards to see what's going on. And I notice that right here where I'm hovering with the cursor, the graph tends to be leveling out. I'm going to put a dotted line right there to kind of show that we have a special feature of an exponential function, and you will just need to remember what that is called.